2 weeks ago, I participated in the inaugural Dust Bowl gravel event, and I have nothing but good things to say about this first time gravel race that happened in Eminence, Indiana. The week leading up to the event, I was actually in Michigan, and so my plan was to swing by Chicago and do a couple of days of the Intelligentsia Cup weekend. However, Texas Roadhouse decided not to go to that race weekend, and so I found myself wanting to race and not having a race to go to, but I knew Dust Bowl was in Indiana, and so I contacted the race promoter, and Mark was able to get me into the event on the very last day it was possible. And so I found myself headed to Indiana that Friday to race the Dust Bowl race that Saturday. Huge shout out to Mark for squeezing me in. All right, I've got a lot of thumbs up to give Mark and the whole Dust Bowl event, but I'd have to say that the first big thumbs up, huge thumbs up, was right at registration the morning of the event. I walk up to the line, I get my number, and I veer my attention over to the left. There's an entire table of the widest assortment of donuts you can imagine. They looked homemade. It was spot on. I grabbed two. I was double fisting donuts back to my van to get ready for the race. Hey, clutch move. How did you guys know that donuts were my favorite? Man, right off the bat, big thumbs up. Donuts at registration, can't beat that at all. Another huge thumbs up I've got to give Mark specifically was his boldness. This might be somewhat controversial these days, but the last thing that Mark did after giving us our pre-race rules and all of that good mumbo jumbo, he was standing up on the back of a pickup truck, and right before sending us off, he said, "Let's bow our heads and pray." So he thanked God for the beautiful day. He thanked him for the ability for us to get out and ride their bikes, and ultimately thanked Jesus for being our Savior. And I thought that was awesome. You don't see that kind of boldness and witness for Christ these days, and so I really appreciated that. So huge shout out to Mark for just being a bold witness for the sake of Christ. I love that, and that alone was a huge thumbs up in my opinion. Now let's talk about the course. The course was 100 miles, 3,400 feet of elevation change, 60 miles of gravel, 7 historic bridge crossings, and 2 off-road adventure sections. This course was really fast. By the end of the day, I had averaged over 21 miles per hour. However, the gravel was quite a bit looser than I had expected, and with there being a ton of turns throughout the course, it definitely made for some interesting racing. Especially at the beginning, you had to really make sure you were at the front of the group so that you didn't get caught behind any crashes throughout those turns. Another thumbs up is that the last half mile was a cyclocross course. As a cyclocross racer, I really appreciate that. I think that's fun. I think it's cool for the spectators to see us do some turns in the tape right before crossing the finish line. So I thought that was a cool feature as well. One of the strategies I always try to implement in these long races is to not do anything stupid in the first half. This is just as true in a 100-mile gravel event as it is in a 60-minute crit, that most people feel good in the first 10 minutes, or most people feel good for the first half of the race. And so if I can save my matches for the second half of the race when some other people might be feeling it, might be in the pain cave, then my attacks will be a little bit more effective and a little bit more likely to stick. And so that was my goal going into the event. Try not to do anything stupid the first half. And for the most part, I stayed true to this strategy. I didn't do anything stupid. I did pull a couple hard turns every now and then just to kind of pick up the pace. I did have to stop at the 33-mile aid station because I really had to take a leak. And so while I was taking care of my business, I asked a volunteer to fill up my water bottle, which was nice. Jump back on my bike. It only took about 10 minutes to catch the group. One little thing I noticed was not too long after I caught back onto the group, we went over a train track, and then a train was actually on the tracks. So if I had been 10 or 15 minutes slower at catching the group, I might have got stuck with the train between me and the group, which would have been really bad. So luckily that didn't happen, but not too many surges in that first half of the race. I was definitely getting pretty antsy at about the 40-mile mark, And eventually at about the 48-mile mark on one of the bigger climbs of the course, I decided to go ahead and attack. And so at this point, I really just wanted to make the race get a little bit harder because we had just been riding in the group at a pretty good pace up to that point. So I just really wanted to turn some bolts and make the pace go a little bit harder. My initial attack was only about 800 watts. However, in a 10-minute period, I ended up surging 3 different times, and the second 2 surges were both over 1,000 watts. And throughout this 10-minute period, my heart rate had climbed all the way up to 187 beats per minute, which is pretty high for me. And after being on the gas for about 15 minutes to get that initial gap from the main group, I found myself in a group of 4, and I really wanted to keep it that way for the rest of the day. In this group was David Brower. He was on the Bissell squad. He's a young gun up from Michigan. I think he was only 17 years old, so I was pretty impressed with his ride. Another rider in the group was Casey Apston, riding for the Against the Grain squad based out here in Louisville. So I run in him and ride with him quite often. I knew he was pretty strong. And then another guy who I forget his name was in an all-white jersey and just black bibs. So he was kind of like the white jersey unknown rider guy. And I had pretty much pinned him as my biggest threat because of his body type. I did not want to sprint this guy at the end of the race. He probably would have taken me. So the 4 of us started working together as a pretty good group, and I could start to tell after a while that I was probably feeling the best out of all the riders. My pulls were a little bit stronger and a little bit longer. And so for 35 miles, my normalized power was 278. My average heart rate was right around 169. The only hiccup we had was at the second aid station around mile 66 because I had to stop. That had been my strategy all day, was to race with 2 big bottles and stop at the second aid to fill those up. So there was no way that I was going to ditch that plan and forfeit my hydration for the rest of the day. So I had told the guys in the group, hey, I'm stopping to fill my bottles. So as soon as I stopped, I take the caps off. A volunteer is there to help me, so he's filling up the water while I pull out this sketchy plastic bag of white powder, which happened to be in my Flow Formulas mix. So I went ahead and was dumping that into my bottles while he was filling them up. And I was only stopped for 52 seconds, but that was just enough time for, as we were rolling out of the second aid, the group was right on our tail. And for a second, there had been one guy that had jumped up to us, and so we were a group of 5, but that didn't last long, and we quickly dwindled back to the original 4 of us and started to open up our gap once again. Somewhere around mile 80 was when the big guy in the white jersey had slashed one of his tires through one of the turns. And while I had pinned him as my biggest threat, I still hated to see him DNF like that because I just don't like seeing anybody have to quit a race because of a mechanical. I would have much rather seen him stay in the group and finish with us. But that's racing, and that's how it goes sometimes. And then shortly after this, around mile 87, we hit a really steep climb, very short steep climb, but it was very loose gravel. And so I was forced to sit down and just power up this thing. And by the time I got to the top, I had a little bit of a gap over the 2 other guys. And so I went ahead and stood up and put the power down to try and see if I could get a gap on these 2 riders. By the end of 2 minutes, going pretty hard, my heart rate was right around 183, which is pretty high considering we had already raced for 90 miles. And so I kept this pace up for about 10 minutes until I felt like I had a pretty comfortable gap. And then I turned down the intensity just a notch to put my heart rate between 175 and 180 for the remaining 10 miles of the race. So with a finishing time of 4 hours, 42 minutes, and 57 seconds, and an average speed of 21.2 miles per hour, I got to take home the Golden Dust Bowl, which I used to eat cereal out of later that night. You know, gotta get that recovery. Overall, I'm super stoked I did this race. It was run super professionally, very smoothly for a first time event, and I foresee this being a really big event in the years to come that a lot of regional riders will put on their calendars. And at the finish, I got to hang out, chow down on some pulled chicken, and slurp on some Tiger's Blood frozen ice. That's a pretty good way to end the day. I only have 2 big takeaways from this race, and the first one is have a hydration plan and stick to your hydration plan. My plan was to start with 2 big bottles and to stop at that second aid station. And I wasn't going to let anything hinder me from stopping at that second aid station, because if I forfeited that hydration, I knew that my race wouldn't have been so well, because I probably would have ended up dehydrated and crawling into the finish line. So I was stopping no matter what. And when I stopped, I had already planned to fill my bottles back with Flow formulas because I really like that mix. It's very high calorie, it tastes good, it's sweet, it's very high in carbs, which is everything you need for race day. The second big takeaway from this weekend is that it's always fun to race your bike. While I was a little disappointed I wasn't racing those crits in Chicago, I am really glad I got to race this 100-mile gravel event because I've got a lot of big races coming up on my calendar, so it was nice to take a step back and just enjoy a low-key local event. Alright, that's all I've got for this one, but before I go, let me tell you about Ignition Coach Co. Ignition Coach Co. is the coaching company that me and Dylan Johnson have started, and it's our mission to provide top-notch, science-based coaching to every single one of our clients. So if you or a buddy might be interested in finding a cycling coach, feel free to check out the website in the description below. Thanks for watching this video. If you liked it, please consider subscribing, and until next time, y'all stay rad.